Well, good morning. I'm Bob Durkin, President of the Greater Scranton Chamber of Commerce. We're here today with our Government Affairs Committee and a group of business people to talk to the individuals who are running for the 40th Senatorial District, now encompassing parts of Lackawanna County. First up is Rosemary Brown. Rosemary has lived in Monroe County for 45 years. She's a graduate of East Stroudsburg High School and the University of Scranton. After earning her degree, she entered the private sector in executive management positions, first in retail and then in the sales sector with the pharmaceutical industry. Rosemary has been a state representative since 2010, is currently serving her sixth term, representing the 189th district. She has the distinction of having been the first woman in the Pennsylvania House of Representatives from Monroe County. Rosemary is currently the majority chairwoman of the House Urban Affairs Committee and remains on the House Transportation Committee, important concern for us here in Lackawanna County. She's been married to her high school sweetheart, Joe, for nearly 30 years, and together they have 3 children, 2 in local public schools and 1 now in college. So, turn it over to you again for a few words.
Good morning. Thank you very much for having me. Thank you for being here. For the people watching on video, we have a small group here with us today, so I'll try to look at the camera, but try to also engage with our attendees. Very pleased to be here with the Chamber. Obviously, we have a lot going on in government, and my philosophy has always been good government, and what does that mean for the people, and how we spend your taxpayer dollars. What's the return on investment? Do you feel that that's the right way to spend money? That's very important for us in Harrisburg. I think that's something that you're constantly asking yourself as a legislator. And, my experience so far as a state rep has been very helpful. I think I've run for office because I feel my voice is one of reason, is one of true concern for what's happening in our state and in our country, and the ability to try to help. I always look at the position as public service. How can I help? What can I do? I think my reputation, hopefully, you will hear, is one of that the door is always open, respectful to people with different opinions, and trying to come to some sort of productive compromise that will make for good government.
So you mentioned we do have some business representatives in the room here today. I mentioned to Rosemary, we have kind of an interesting cross-section, just enough to give some individuals from manufacturing, education, nonprofit, utilities, law, pharmaceutical, and in some ways that's a nice way for us to think about the way Lackawanna County and northeastern Pennsylvania businesses are very diverse. And so the people we have representing Harrisburg, we need for them to know and understand that there's no singular or uniform need or concern, but to be connected with the whole diverse element of our local economy. So with that, and since we are the Chamber of Commerce, the first question that I wanted to put out there, again, for general comment, has to do with the economy. So the question I would ask you, considering the circumstances or opportunities, chances for someone in the Pennsylvania Senate, what can you do to help us strengthen, grow, diversify the economy here in northeastern Pennsylvania?
Yeah, well, number one, it is the biggest issue right now, the inflation and economy. No surprise, I don't think, to any of us. But I've always believed that government sets the environment for a lot of how things function and what the economy reacts to. So I think number one is the ability not for government to be a roadblock to any sort of economic development or any sort of opportunities that would come to Pennsylvania. And that comes from local government, that comes from state government, that comes from ways that business would say, I don't want to go into Pennsylvania. It's just, they're not workable. They don't really want to see us there. And so we have to make sure that all the policies that we do, that we are not a roadblock, number one. I think number two is we talked a little bit about the workforce, making sure that the workforce skills are there, that we have our university and our career technical schools actually making sure we have the right workforce. So oftentimes I will have our economic development group say that there's a business looking to come into the area, and then they decided not to come in. well, why didn't they decide to come in? Well, because of the fact that we don't have the workforce. And I'm always shocked by that because I think we have a lot of people who want jobs and a lot of great opportunities, but they don't necessarily have the skill set that that company would want. So we really need to connect that with our career technical schools, with our community colleges, you know, in that avenue. One of the other things that I feel pretty strongly about is, you know, big companies, really big companies have 20-year plans. You know, they're out 20 years. They're looking at where their company is going to be 20 years from now, what jobs they're going to be in 20 years from now. We need as a state and as the economic development and as our the education, universities, career tech, we need to say, what are those jobs going to be and start to train our children, even if it's in the K through 12, start to prepare them for those jobs of 20 years from now. We start to do that, we start to get to a point where we have the workforce and we have great opportunities for our future adults who are going to be working to match up with the future. And I don't think we are really that far looking ahead as we should. And I think that will help us get ahead of some other states too, where we're saying, hey, we're preparing our kids here in Pennsylvania for these type of jobs because we know in 20 years, this is where we're going to be. And then that helps with economic development also. I mean, that's a very large initiative, but I think something that I would like to see more of and sort of spearhead as well.
So we're big on planning here at the Chamber. Staff would tell you with frowns on their faces that we do a lot of it, but it's right exactly what we talked about here. One of the challenges that we've seen across the board in the Commonwealth, and remember, Pennsylvania is also competing with New York, New Jersey, Ohio, and Maryland. And we've seen in some of the other states, perhaps a little bit more of what you just talked about, a little bit more of that forward thinking, the strategic approach to economic development. Pennsylvania, I will tell you, because we are an economic development organization as well as the Chamber of Commerce, has really pulled back on the kind of support that we see out of New York, particularly in Ohio, putting substantial resources into the combination of economic development. So I like what you're saying. From the seat in the Senate, how do you see, like, maybe just want to take it a step further, and maybe includes this whole idea of incentive. So the Department of Economic and Community Development at the Commonwealth has pulled back on providing kind of incentives so that we're competing to bring a business in or to try to keep the business here with one of the other states. So how do you feel about incentives or opportunities for using these state resources to try to attack that challenge?
Yeah, I think that, you know, everything's always a budget issue in Harrisburg, so you always have to be realistic and say, you know, where can you put the money in the best spot and then look at the anticipated return on investment. And I think that would be there, obviously. So I think putting more money into the incentives, but asking the businesses, what really is the incentive that works for a company? Because sometimes we hear, you know, tax credits or things, well, it's not really that big of an incentive for me. Sometimes we do hear it's good, sometimes we don't. I think identifying what the real incentives are that will actually make the company choose Pennsylvania over New York or New Jersey, and then, you know, implementing those here. And you know, there are some differences. I mean, I've had a company that went to Texas instead of Pennsylvania, you know, for different reasons. Virginia was very big too on doing some, you know, giving land, giving buildings, different types of things. So I think we have to get creative, but funding is a piece of this. And I think looking at where we, you know, spend our dollars in the state budget continues to be a real big piece of this job in the Senate. And when you represent a larger area, you know, as a state rep, you know, I think the experience has been helpful. And then you get to a Senate district, which is much, much larger. The ability to maneuver 3 different counties and understand how very different they are, but how they do economic development in different ways, and what those needs are, what those incentives are for that county versus another county. You really have to understand the details in order to bring that to Harrisburg, say what's going to work at the Department of Community Development.
Well, again, as I said to you when we were preparing for this, you can react to some of the things you said. No, in a very positive way.
Get myself in trouble there?
No, in a very positive way, very positive way. Believe me, the people around this room, a number of the leaders of our boards and various affiliates, we keep talking about the concept of regional. And, you know, historically, when one is from Lackawanna County, you often think about, when we talk regionally, you immediately think Lackawanna Luzerne County. But there have been a number of things that have happened recently that have told us we need to be thinking in a different way about regions, including the district that you're going to potentially represent. Can you react to the idea of how we might be able to work with Lackawanna County, Monroe County, Cardinal County, et cetera? Okay.
Well, it makes sense. I mean, when you look at the Northeast, I mean, we have a lot of similarities on the same issues and problems, but there is differences in how people live in Wayne County versus Lackawanna County versus Monroe County. But I think when you start looking at resources and you're seeing regionalization from an emergency standpoint, you know, our fire, our EMS, you're seeing a lot of that because of the ability to utilize the resources the best way possible. So when money and incentives, and we want to try to make things work, putting minds together from a larger regional area makes sense, because you will have impacts all around the board. You will have people commuting from a half an hour away to take a job in Lackawanna from Monroe, or vice versa, Wayne, you know, so you do have where it bounces off of each other as far as the benefits. So I always think regionalization is a great thing. And the ability, like I said, as a legislator, is when you have those three counties, to be the voice to help that regionalization. So whatever, you know, is pulled together, you're supposed to be the voice that helps stand up to the fact of what that region needs. And so I do think it makes a lot of sense, and especially when resources become tight and you have to say where the best is going to be to get the best, you know, return on investment. And then maybe this time it's done here, next time it's done over here. And it's sort of like that, just overall planning, you know, thinking ahead and sort of strategizing on different parts of economic development.
There's certainly a lot of different issues, whether it's stormwater or like,
absolutely.
Perhaps we'll touch on that at the end of it. Let's come back and stick with what I think most people in this room, most people who are to be watching this in the chamber world and the business world, say is number one, for the workforce. We find ourselves in, you know, notwithstanding the complexities of the supply chain and other issues that COVID has really, you know, really exacerbated. But the whole issue of workforce, the challenge of the workforce, were there before COVID, and they've just become that much more challenging. You know, for those of us in the Lackawanna Valley, whether you're driving up and down the Casey Highway or whether you're all in Ford and Taylor and other places where our major businesses are, you see billboards everywhere, you see yard signs everywhere, competition spheres for the workforce. Now, again, there's no simple answer, and the Pennsylvania Senate alone cannot respond to that or address that singularly. But the Commonwealth does have a role in a couple of different areas that I think have a positive impact. Daycare, public transportation, training programs, and resources, potential resources that can help our businesses provide an incentive for people to come and work and to help work on both sides of the equation. You know, the businesses to prepare themselves and to be better at keeping and providing sustainable jobs, but also for the individuals themselves. So let me touch on it quickly, if you don't mind, the daycare issue. It's really become something that it's still becoming a little light on. Commonwealth does provide a certain amount of resources, training, and support for families. Do you have any thoughts on how we might address that, or how we can take it?
Well, listen, I can tell you as a mom of three, I remember that child care bill very strongly, and you know, my husband and I used to talk about it all the time, you know, how the child care was so expensive, and you look at what your salary is and what your child care is, and then also the choice to leave your child and go to work too. So, you know, you put this all together and you have a big conversation going on depending on your household budget or what your salary is. But I do think that the child care system itself is suffering too from the loss of workers too. So that's becoming very difficult to get quality child health care, the access to that. So that's something that we're looking at too, to see how we can, with the competitiveness of all jobs that are out there, again, how we get someone in the child care industry. But we did do the first ever child care tax credit, which was this was in this year's state budget. And I think that's something to try to incentivize again, people going back to work and getting a tax credit for their childcare. And so that was something I think was very good. I think we need to start working on some more measures like that, on the ability to help people get back to work, and show that you can do this. You can do this, and you can be a good role model. You can still take very good care of your family, have quality childcare, and then you could also, get a tax incentive or something like that to help out.
One of we have a person on our board who holds multiple daycare centers, and when she talks to us about this, she said one of the challenges is sort of coming down. It's down the end of the line in a sense. You've got people who have degrees in early childhood education who might start out in daycare, but that's just their opening. That's their first job, and then as soon as they can, they want to get into a teaching position, whatever. You can understand it. But again, this is kind of exposed a problem within the system, because you're taking a major portion of the workforce, and most really proportionally more women than men, and who are helping with decisions being made there at home. And so we'd like to see Senate, essentially on your guidance and leadership, work with us to try to address that, because it didn't used to be a Chamber of Commerce issue. It used to be a basic human service issue, but we said, well, that's someone else's problem. What we've found on the workforce front is that the full range of individuals, veterans, disabled, individuals who've done childcare, previously incarcerated, that's a broader pool, and it makes it more challenging for a lot of our employers who maybe historically didn't look at those pools. I'm just throwing out a lot of things against the wall there, but any thoughts or comments on how Tom Walsh might be able to help us?
Well, I think, it's a new world. So part of our jobs is to look and say, like, what hasn't been done, think out of the box. And I am like you, I think, on this, where what can we do? We're still searching for some better answers, I think, on helping out, and I hope to be able to dig further. I think the scary part is the quality piece too. The quality of the workforce that's in the childcare sector, and you getting that care when you leave your child, but what that cost would be. You want the childcare worker to be paid well, and you want them to enjoy being with the children, but you can only pay so much for the childcare. The employee can only pay so much for the childcare, and so then you start to look at the domino effect. Of how do we fix that? So, is there something that goes to the childcare centers? Is there something that becomes more of almost like a K-12 funding, or something like that becomes like a child care line item of something to help out that sort of business to support the workforce? I don't know. I think that's where we really have to look at creative approaches.
One of the things we don't expect you to all answer.
Yeah.
One of the things
I'll be honest.
we're looking for is someone in the senatorial position, who will be a partner with us as we provide the conduit to our community. Another one of the workforce issues that we think needs to be regularly addressed, including Lackawanna County, in public transportation, and support that PennDOT provides to the likes of schools and public transit system, the paratransit, and the transit. We've had a lot of success working with schools in the last few years to bring fixed route transit into the various parks that we've developed through our Lackawanna and local building companies. But there's a subsidy involved, and only so much money can go around, but a recognition that fixed route transit, public transit is an important part of the workforce as well. I know you've been on the transportation committee in the house. What are your thoughts with respect to transportation?
Yeah, it's very important. And I will tell you, years back, we did a poverty seminar in Harrisburg. Each legislator got their story of their life, and then you had to go through a simulation. And I didn't have a car. I had a single mother. I had a child with a special need. And I went through the simulation, and I was trying to find a job through the simulation. And just to go for the job interview, I had to pay for my public transportation. To get to the job interview, I had to pay for my public transportation to apply for my childcare, you know, to be on the waiting list for the childcare. I had to apply for different things, but I was using my public transit tickets that I only had a limited amount during the simulation, and I was out. And I remember saying to myself, if I can't get to where I need to get to, whether it's work or to get my child or even to go for the interview, I'm in this vicious cycle. And so that is a huge piece of, I think, having the workforce show up, get there, have the ability to get to the interviews, have the ability to take care of themselves. And so I think, again, with that, the subsidies can only probably be, there's a finite amount of money and dollars, but how do you use them the best you can? It's like everything else. Like, you know, where can we maximize and where can we save money so that we can increase over here, or, you know, take something from over here without sort of, you know, increasing the tax base in some fashion. So I think, again, it's a very important piece, but how do you do it so that you do it better?
There's an organization called Equal, which is a part of the Scranton Foundation, and it includes a whole host of organizations, including chambers, nonprofit community as well. So that I think that's a space that we love if you are elected to the Senate position. We'd love to have to be connected to that. That's really important. That also speaks to the reason it's not just like Money County.
I know in the Poconos we have a big issue of getting people from where they live to the line.
Right.
So that's something that has always been an issue. So the line has public transportation has lengthened and has strengthened, but to get people from wherever their private community is or their house to the line because of the rural nature is very good.
So just one final element of the workforce issue, and again, it does touch on what the state is currently doing and how we'd like to see some things addressed. So the way the dollars tend to work is probably where coming from the federal government to the state for workforce development, and then ultimately the state to the local workforce development boards. Money County has its own unique because we have a singular type of workforce development board just for Money County. And work very well with these folks at Career Link, they have other programs. But I think everybody who's along the line will tell you this. One of the problems is there's a lot of money, but there are a lot of strings attached to development. So whether you're a manufacturer or whatever, you know, enterprise, a logistics firm, it may look good on paper. You'll say, oh, well, we give money for training, we give money for this or that. But frankly, the bureaucratic elements that are part of this make it very, very difficult. Even those who are, you know, corporate development board and the like will tell you it's hard to spend the dollars. There are a lot of businesses that could use these dollars. I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts on whether the Commonwealth could find a way to loosen those dollars. I'm not asking for more money. There's a better use of the dollars when it actually fits the specific needs of the business of the Money County.
Well, it goes right back to really the first question or what I was saying about not being roadblocks to economic development or businesses. And so a program like that is something that's supposed to be helpful, but do the parameters need to be reviewed and revisited? Sounds like they do. And so those are the kind of things that if we hear that from you and we talk about that, then that's something that, you know, we should address. And to be honest with you, I haven't heard much of that yet. So, you know, even when I come to these forums, you learn more about what the needs are. But that to me is something that is simple to revisit. It may not be simple to fix, but to revisit and to be able to say why and this isn't working, and then how do we take the steps to do it. But that's where you can be very helpful in getting good policies and stuff.
All right, so now I'm going to give you a break because I'm giving you an underhand softball toss. Our legislative priorities in the chamber has a government affairs committee. There are government affairs business chair of the committee, and a number of those represented the committee here today. We do legislative priorities, and I was told by Victoria not to overwhelm you by giving you all of those priorities today. But we will be passing them on.
No, it's good.
No, and it's well thought out. Quite honestly, it's also balances and meshes with individual we're doing regionally. Levinsky is here, chairs the Untitled Chamber of Commerce as well. And we've been working together in government affairs to make sure that the legislative priorities that are identified, Lackawanna County, Luzerne County, and beyond, Wyoming County, and others, they met. And one of the ones that really everybody feels strongly about, and definitely Lackawanna County, is the potential for Amtrak service from Scranton. And we know that if this happens, PennDOT's got to play an important role on this, whether it's regulatory subsidies. But I know you've been involved in this, so
softball. Well, I took my first job in New York from the Poconos commuting to the train coming the next year. And, I'm almost 52, so that's a long time. But definitely in support of the train. I think the region, the area is in support of the train for many reasons, on a tourism level, on an economic development level, and even I had a conversation with the universities, also very much on their level too. So, it's a multi-billion-dollar project. So there's really no one entity that can do this alone. And, and there was some issues with, some of the ownership of the track line and things like that. So you have the Pennsylvania Railroad Authority involved. You have the Federal Railroad Administration. You have Amtrak now considering very large investment. And so, the good part about this type of project is it is a bipartisan, by state support. At least I'm involved in that, which is good. We've signed letters together, we've done things together. And actually, just later today, I have a phone call with, are you on that call too? Yeah. So, with a multi-group of people to get the most updated status on this. And so I think with the federal dollars, where are those dollars getting them, the distribution of those and getting them towards this project? And then once that's there, saying, well, what's Amtrak's investment? And then also the Department of Transportation and getting the rail line moved up more on the transportation project list, which I think is there. It just depends on all the dollars coming together. And I mean, listen, in the Pocono region, which is all of us, it's about a $73 million anticipated revenue generator on tourism alone. So, but it is a good project, and it is something I think people want, and something that's needed.
Frankly, we feel beyond the, moving optimistic and saying it's going to come into place. There's
right.
a lot of hurdles to get there.
This is the time.
Yeah.
This is the time.
The long-term economic capacity to change, as I said earlier today, the whole dynamic of what we define as region. Monroe County, Poconos, incredible growth space right now. And as we talked about in a couple of different ways, a talent attraction issue as well. Mentioned that, your decision based on the potential for rail connection to New York City. We're looking at it the same way because we've done some talent attraction initiatives, particularly, focused in the last year and a half on New York City, Northern Jersey, outside Philly, including Southern Jersey and Baltimore, Washington area. We found a tremendous amount of individuals who have either come back to Pennsylvania or who are interested. So this is more editorial than question. I really do feel that if that rail is running to Pocono, that becomes the first step to get them into northeastern Pennsylvania. Then we like to believe that they're going to be looking around northeastern Pennsylvania, not necessarily back into New Jersey or New York. They're going to be looking at Scranton, Rosemary, Stroudsburg, and other areas of all of this footprint that we are in Homestead as well. Because there's a lot that Homestead crazy. There's a tremendous amount of people who move back and really excited for second homes or life. And we think that, again, we hope that you're continuing to in this position if that's something of a dialogue.
Oh, it's a multifaceted benefit. And but I do think this is the time, definitely.
So really also at the top, the system at the top of our legislative priority is always infrastructure. Federal infrastructure, including the entire name of that, the Act, the Infrastructure Act, is bringing a lot of resources to Pennsylvania. Clearly, we have, what we used to call our motto of the Scranton Chamber for the Great Road Team. And we recognize that throughout Pennsylvania, interconnectedness so many roadways that go by Pennsylvania and by Lackawanna County in this case. Any thoughts on what you and the Senate might be able to bring some infrastructure resources given the front of it?
Well, this I think is where it becomes very helpful to have the experience in the state, legislature previously before going into the Senate. And being a member on the Transportation Committee, I've seen a lot of different projects. We have a lot of different needs. Again, there's a finite amount of money. You probably know this already, but one of the largest road systems in the country. And as far as bridges, also one of the largest in the country. So looking at this is a great deal of responsibility. And that comes from a safety issue, really. All of this is about safety and about moving business and moving people through their normal daily lives. But I do think there's a finite amount of money, and it's your job and your responsibility to be able to navigate and show in Harrisburg why this road or that road is a priority and be able to fight those battles. Because you want to be on that top of that list. Will you always be on the top of that list? Maybe not. But you've got to be able to know how to navigate it and be able to say the reasoning behind it. And again, the return on investment and, why this project's better than that project, and be able to communicate with the right people to get you up on that top of that list. And I think it's been very helpful to be on that transportation committee and to have that experience to know how to navigate all of it.
Invested infrastructure takes on a whole new concept these days. It isn't just road and bridges. It's stormwater management. And in the Mid-Valley area, the area of which our Lackawanna County in the 40 will be in the 40th district, that's an issue. How to bring these issues together. Any experience thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I always say, hey, the township supervisors, one of their largest issues is stormwater management. And they say, it's not the most fun, Rosemary, but it's an issue that we deal with so much that people don't realize how much we deal with it. And we have a lot of experience with stormwater management and ensuring grants and things are there to help. So again, that becomes a public safety issue. And it also becomes an issue on making our roads last. If stormwater is not directed and it's not appropriately taken care of, you're destroying roads and things and bridges that really have already been invested in with state dollars. So you have to really take care of those type of things. And, bringing attention again to that is having the voice and the ability to be able to kind of like keep going and keep pushing and saying, this needs to be fixed, this needs to be fixed. You need someone that's going to open their mouth and talk to the appropriate people in Harrisburg to get that.
And I can assure you that if you land in this position, the wallflowers in the Mid-Valley.
Will be. Yeah. No, it's important. Yeah.
Maybe you're going to hear from these folks.
The learning of these different issues of, the newer counties in the Senate district is important. So again, every time you do a forum or you do something, you do learn more and more about it. But it's not unusual to have a stormwater situation that needs to be addressed. Is basically what I'm saying. But you have to know how to fight that battle.
That's everybody. The other element of infrastructure, which is opportunity as much as anything else, is broadband. And we know that there are dollars, major dollars that have been brought to the Commonwealth on this. I think that's right. It's the Broadband Development Authority that created that.
Yeah.
Can you speak to how we might take advantage of that?
Yeah, I mean, that's something newly done by the legislature. And obviously there was an issue before COVID, and then COVID really brought it to fruition, I think, which the fact that, hey, listen, we need to do something. And so it was a positive to be able to push that after COVID. And so that was created to sort of, manage all the dollars that are coming in towards broadband initiatives and how we are going to manage them and where it's going to be distributed to and just the whole overall authority to make sure that we're doing things right. And we did do some other dollars towards underserved areas to try to get them up to par with the broadband, but big initiative and one that I think that again, since it's established, any place in Pennsylvania will have that ability to have a voice to that authority. But your legislature is going to play a big role. Your representative will play a big role in that to say, what do we need here in Lackawanna? What do we need in Wayne? What do we need in Monroe? And again, being able to navigate that. so much I feel that I'm saying to you this morning is about the ability to navigate through the process. And I see some smiles because they know it's not easy. It's not easy in Harrisburg, and that's why we're called representatives, and to go down there and bring down exactly what you're saying, whether it's stormwater or broadband, and be able to say, well, this is what Lackawanna is, this is what and just have the details and know them well, and know them very well, so that we can get that authority to say, oh, you're going to put somebody in Lackawanna because they need it up in Lackawanna, because we know these details, because, the legislature mentioned it to us.
So another obviously important area of the Commonwealth is public education, funding public education. K through 12, vocational, higher education as well. Possibly general.
It's a big one. It's a big one. And, education is such an important issue. And, it's a bill that I don't take very lightly at all. None of us should, because it's very important. It's the children and it's the workforce, like we were talking about before. If we're doing it right, we're having our children enjoy school, and we're having them develop and create the education that they need for jobs that are going to be successful for them, and they're going to be happy working in their jobs. I always remind my children that you have to be mostly happy with what you're doing. So no job is perfect, but so we have to put a good amount of money in there. And I think this last budget, we did $750 million into education. Since 2010, since I've been elected to now, most of the districts that I have, school districts, receive 27% to 72% increase in their state funding, which is fantastic. So that's their state allocation. So we've gotten them up to more allocation from the state. And that came from a basic education funding commission. I don't know if you remember that, some of you, but it was a better way to distribute the overall K through 12 funding. So if you're looking at the funding is almost like a pizza pie, what slice of the pie do you get for each school district? And we made that more fair for each school district. And what that does is then the school districts get a certain amount of dollars. They get a little bit of federal, they get some state, and then the rest is your property taxes. And so, that's very important, even when you look not only from a residential, again, if people don't want to live in the area, you're going to have a problem with workforce, you're going to have a problem with employees, but business, what's the business tax going to be based on that school tax? And so that plays a very big role in businesses deciding to come to the area as well. That becomes in your chart. Why am I going to go to Pennsylvania? Why am I going to go to Lackawanna, versus Monroe? What's the differences? So this is a quality issue with our education that we need to really work on quality and average yearly progress with our children. We need to make sure that we're teaching them real life skills, that we are teaching them for the jobs of the future. Sounds really easy, right? But we need to have the voices be strong on that. And then we need to make sure that that bill is appropriate and reasonable for the taxpayer and for the business owner. They have to work hand in hand. And this has been a constant battle in Harrisburg, and one that I've been fighting, because I definitely want strong education, but I also believe in, that bill being appropriate for the taxpayer.
Yeah. So in addition to basic public education, at the University of Scranton graduate, we have a number of colleges and universities here in Lackawanna County and throughout the state. And while we do not have a state university per se, Penn State, Scranton, which would be in this district, the impact of all of the higher ed throughout the region is on. And those being private enterprises, they're not getting money directly from the state, but there is a key element of that can help, and that is the strength of funding. Those dollars that go not to the university, but rather they're affordable, they go to the student. What are your thoughts on what to do there?
Always a great program. It's always a great program trying to help make it more affordable for students and give them the accessibility to attend a university. And we put more money into CLIA to make sure that the student gets an increased funding amount. So definitely need to continue the CLIA program for students. Just to ensure it's a great grant program. So I don't think there's any negative to that whatsoever.
Most recently in this budget, budget we just passed, we're really pleased that the corporate net income tax reduction was initiated. Those of us in the business community,
Finally, right? Finally.
we would prefer an accelerated schedule on that, but can you speak to that and the need to maintain the pledge, get that down from now 8.99 down to the 4.99 target?
Yes, since I came into office in 2010, I think I voted for this maybe twice to try to get it down. At that point, it was to try to get it down to 6%, in a schedule down. And I'm absolutely thrilled that this is in the state budget. So again, we go back to basically our initial conversation with one of the highest corporate net income taxes in the country. So how do we be competitive to attract businesses to Pennsylvania and then businesses to Lackawanna, like I said, to take it down a notch? But so this is going to be extremely helpful. So it took it down in this year's state budget to 8.99%, and then it takes it down 0.5%. So down to eventually the 4.99%, which will make us very competitive, which is a great thing. And when you have these larger businesses coming in, again, you get that additional tax base and rateable that helps, take away that burden on the residential person as well. But it's also creating jobs and helping out our families live where they work, and work where they live, and so that's very helpful too. Now I think as a senator, it'll be a priority to make sure that that is completed, and it could be even accelerated, with that initial proposal. But you want to make sure that it is put through, that it actually happens. It's good we got down to 8.99%, but you want to make sure that you have the legislator that's ready to say, no, this is something that you'll fight the battle for, and that it will go down, and maybe go down faster than that only 0.5% every year.
Again, you don't want to explain it to folks, so it's tied to revenue in subsequent years.
Yeah, I think it's down to 0.5% every year. So 8.99 and then a 0.5% reduction every year until it gets down to 4.9%. So I think that you got to watch. You just have to watch, because although it's in there, it's in the state budget, sometimes things don't happen. So, yeah, you got to make sure that you have somebody who'll fight.
So a couple of other things that just sort of broad and I do not want to get into anything partisan, but one of the questions, one of the issues that came up from some of our members is just your take on the nature of let's call it the civil discourse within the elected General Assembly and the parents were well together. I'm just going to leave it at that.
That's a big one too. Listen, it's disappointing, I think, for everyone, not only the legislature, but the public. I hear that all the time. Oh, Rosemary, it's just such this all the time. And one of the reasons I actually decided to run for the Senate, I was very thoughtful about it, was because I felt that my reputation and my voice to be a reason and to be a Republican and be able to represent a Democrat district for 12 years, I think shows that I have respect for people of all parties, and I have the ability to work with people of all parties and still remaining conservative values and trying to work together. And that's one reason major reason I decided to run, because I think that voice is needed more than ever. I too have frustrations with both sides of the aisle, but the confidence and I'd say comfortable nature to be able to speak up now, after being in the legislature for 12 years, it is real. That ability to feel comfortable to say to your caucus or to someone else, wait a minute, what are you doing? What's going on? And so there is a lot of civil discourse. I think some of that also comes from, unfortunately, very quick reading, very quick, we're a quick paced society. Everything social media, everything, being delivered in a day. And I think we need to all stop, regardless of our party affiliation, and really look at the issue really look at it clearly. You can know what party you lean more towards, but you really need to look at the issue clearly and say, what's really the best for right now and what's the best for long term. And there is a middle. There's always a middle somewhere. But it's that ability for the people that you put in office to be able to understand where that middle is and where they can meet and how they talk to each other and how they talk to constituents, how they talk to lobbyists, how they talk to people. Because if I can say one thing, really, we all have to be very cognizant of. We all have to be very cognizant of what we believe, but how to speak to people and do so in a respectful manner. So I hope to be that voice for you.
One of the seems to be the direct connection to that level of partisan is this whole concept of using constitutional amendments to deal with what are truly legislative issues, legislative standards. I wanted to ask you your thoughts on that. So those who are not familiar, this movement had been movement to basically bundle as many 5 or 6 different actions under potential constitutional amendment change on law.
Yeah. Well, constitutional amendments should never be taken lightly. It's a serious process. But I think, I'm very divisive, as we just got off the conversation of, the type of climate that we're in. Very divisive, very difficult issues where, you're out and about and, one says one thing, one says another thing. It's all over the board. And it starts getting very like this. It's a great way for people's voices to be heard. And you don't know the outcome. You don't know the outcome. If you wanted a definitive outcome, whatever party wanted it, you would wait for control of the House, Senate, and the governor. And then you'd get a definitive outcome of a law that you would want. The constitutional amendment is a very strong voice to the people. And you don't know what that outcome will be. And once that voice is heard on the constitutional amendment, the people, it was 2021, we put up the emergency declaration order, the extensions that the governor was doing. And the people, their voice was heard, that they didn't want that continual extension, of the emergency order. And so that was a very divisive time. It was a very difficult time and a divisive time, but people spoke. And I think that that's where you can look at the constitutional amendment as the ability for you, the people, on an issue that continues to be divisive and the legislators want to enforce, but it should not be taken.
So then at this point, pause and see if there's anybody here that has any questions that you'd like to ask.
Hi, Don Brominski from EGI. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you.
I'm going to go a little bit more regional in just this area and talk about Pennsylvania. Uniquely situated between competing with Ohio and West Virginia, South and West, and New York and New Jersey on the Northeast. And I'm grouping them that way because they have energy and environmental policies that are polar opposites of each other. Where does Pennsylvania fit with energy and environmental policies compared to the people we're competing with?
So I think that we are better with our energy policies, but we still need a lot of work. I think the conversation again in the education to responsible energy production needs to continue. There's a lot of misinformation out there where, with the Marcellus Shale and the drilling, we have so much energy in Pennsylvania that we can, utilize, and we're not really doing everything that we should at this point. So I think we can do a little bit better. I think the governor going into Reggie, which is a regional greenhouse gas, that has been very difficult, and one of the reasons that we're starting to see electricity prices go up and some issues there. So that's a very big concern, and I think Pennsylvania, we have a lot of opportunity, and so we're better, I think, than some of those policies. Some of those states that basically ban and there's nothing. But I think we need to do a lot better. So that could go on, that subject, you know, that with all the different regulations, but the overall feeling that I have is we need to use our energy and we need to use our resources. And again, how do we do that in a way that if somebody is questioning any sort of safety or concern with the environment, that we give the facts to them.
Thank you.
Phil Cochran with the United Way Labor Liaison, and I want to go back to early childhood. There's three of us in the room that are very involved with Head Start and PDE. We don't want to become user labor company apprentices for the public school sector. We'll ask you to go back and visit that. The one thing we need to do is provide a family sustaining wage for those working and taking care of our youngest children. So we just ask you to go back and do that and take a look at it. We want to keep those long-term employees. They're already trained. We don't want to be trained ground for a school.
Yeah. No, thank you, Bill. And I think it does go back to what we were saying, how difficult that is. And you want, you know, quality childcare, and you want the worker to be paid well to do that. So Head Start, you know, we support them very strongly, and we've given more dollars to them. Actually, the state budget was a very good budget for them too. But I agree with you. I think all of this, because of the current times, needs to be revisited and, you know, thought out of the box of what maybe, you know, we've never thought about doing before. But, you know, sometimes other states are doing things better than us too. We have to look at everything, come up with some creative solution. And we'll look forward to having you help us with that. Thank you.
Just to touch on what you had said before about the constitutional amendment to the legislature. To me, it seems that most times when these come up, at least lately, they come up in election cycles that are normally low turnout elections. So the next time this may come up, potentially to come up, would be the primary in 2023, which is the off-cycle election, traditionally low turnout. It also appears to me that you're abrogating your obligation to legislate because you're no longer reaching across the aisle to reach a compromise. It's, if I can't get everything I want, I'm going to take my ball back home. Yeah. But my big concern is you're laser focused on an issue right now, try to push it through the constitutional amendment. The ground rules change, the climate changes 5 years down the road, and that constitutional amendment now really hurts the common. But you can't change it the way you can when you legislate it. And go back to the legislature, address it in that fashion. Now you're stuck with it, and it may take a couple cycles of legislation to get rid of it down the road and change it. So it seems to me it's a really bad idea to try to do that, unless you got an absolutely important issue.
Yeah. I mean, you could look at a lot of ways. I think unfortunately, Governor Wolf did probably, I think, the largest amount of vetoes, you know, in the last 40 years. And so when the compromising and trying to come through, you know, I think that plays a big role in it sometimes. But even when the constitutional amendment, let's say it was to get on a ballot, you know, it still has to go through 2 consecutive sessions to be able to be put on the ballot. And so that hasn't happened, and you know this, I'm sure, and it hasn't happened yet for that to happen. But even if the people's voices, once they're heard, then you still have legislation that has to be drafted. And then that legislation has to pass the House, the Senate. So, you know, it still has that process to go through almost. But I can see what you're saying. I can definitely see what you're saying. So that's why I think you do have to say, you don't take them lightly. You don't take them. It's not a light process to take. But, you know, I think when you see the environment that we're in, and that's where you say, you know, because the legislature, you know, is divisive and you have vetoes happening like crazy, let the people decide.
What happens 5 years down the road with the climate change? It's stuff.
Yeah. Well, you know, I think like anything else, you can go back at it. And again, it becomes that same process again. You go back at it, or you go back at it legislatively, you know. And I think that's the nature of our world, unfortunately. You know, we're always changing, and there's always, and right now I think we're here, and I'm hoping we get here. You mentioned having participated in the poverty simulation and understanding that the role that transportation challenges, preventing people from getting to work. I was just wondering if you had other takeaways from that experience regarding the barriers that are marginalized populations face and that public policy can help alleviate that. Yeah, I realized that if I was longer than a month, I wouldn't have made it. I was very big on, I was on a poverty initiative with, at that time, the Majority Leader Dave Reed. And the reason I was put on that was I was very big on financial literacy for our children in our schools. And I had actually gotten past legislation. I wanted every child to have financial literacy before they left high school, just so, the best can make the best decisions they can make. And I was able to get it to count as a graduation requirement. And that was the compromise. I wanted everybody to have it. I wanted it mandated. But our school system had a very difficult time being able to say they could definitively put it in, every class with all the other things that they're responsible for. So we had that count as graduation requirement. But because I was so much involved with financial literacy and thinking it was so good, I got put on this poverty initiative. And so I went through the simulator. I would have realized I wouldn't have made it. I was glad the session was over at a month, number one. And number two, I think I realized the cycle that when the bell went off to start, and I looked at my personal situation, and I had single mom, special needs child, I needed a job, right? So my first thing was, okay, where am I going first? What place am I going first? And I need to get a job. So I went to go apply for a job. That was my first bus pass. And okay, I put the application in, and then my next place was to the child care. And then I went to go sign up for the waiting list for child care. What happened was I got a call to go get the job, and I was still on the waiting list for child care. So I had to reject the job offer. So I couldn't get out of that because of the child care situation that I was in. Really just the idea that poor people are right. So I think everybody has a different story in life and everybody has a different start. I think we have to be careful that we remember that, but I think we have to be also responsible with taxpayer dollars and what works to help people move forward. I'm very big about helping people. And I think people come into my office, life happens, and lifting you back up and getting you to be the best self that you can be. And so I try to think about that with the dollars that we use. But boy, do I remember that.
Representative Vince Galco, the Chamber has a terrific working relationship with our current delegation that they do a lot. We work together with them. They're here often. If you were to be successful in November, you would bring bipartisanship relationship to the Chamber as our current members all one party. Can you explain a little bit, because you will likely be in the majority, who knows what's going to happen in November, but likely be in the majority, how important the majority is and what you can bring as a member of the majority?
Yeah, that's, well, Vince, that's a big question too, but I think when the majority obviously sets the stage for the initiatives that are going to be, worked on, what the priorities are, and what legislation fixes, like we're talking about, how are we going to fix some of these things? Bringing those to the table for the actual schedule. Now, it doesn't mean that the minority party shouldn't be involved and shouldn't be working with us on developing the proposals. But at the end of the day, the majority party will decide this is coming up for a vote, this is not coming up for a vote, and this is what we want to accomplish, what we think is productive. And as being in the majority now, and then hopefully, being a senator and being the majority there, I think the voice again of that experience and that ability to really move initiatives that we need to get done. I mean, it's something that I can't really talk enough about, because when I first started in 2010, it takes you a while. It takes you a little bit to get used to things, and it takes you, if you're all legislators, it takes you a while for us to get to know each other and to get to know how we work together, no matter what your party is. But having that experience and having that ability as the majority party, to get initiatives that you mentioned today through. I mean, it's key. It's key. I could go, like, you know, it's because it's such a big question, but I think the experience is just huge. It's huge when you go from representing 62,000 people to upwards of 250, 265,000, you know, as a senator. You know, you need to be able to understand what it's like to be in this world and the history and the balance of getting things done. And the majority party basically plays a large role in that.
Representative Rosemary Brown, candidate for the 40th Senatorial District of Pennsylvania. Thank you. Today.
Thank you for your time.
Any final thoughts or comments you'd like to make?
No, I really hope to be able to represent you and do so in a way that would make you proud, and always have the open door policy and the mutual respect. And I will never forget this is public service, and doing it to try to help. So I hope that I will get your support. Thank you. Thank you very much.